Hello everybody, I am an antique table. I don't know how old I am, I stopped counting a while ago, but over 100 years old for sure. And I am very disappointed and sad. And no, it's not because I look ugly, it's fixable by the way, but because I feel unloved. I've been sitting in the furniture stash for a while and people kept moving me around. I think it's because I'm not the best seller in the area right now, but I think finally my time has come. Hi everybody, welcome to another makeover. I see you made my table. This table has been in my husband's family for a while. It belonged to his grandma first and then to his mom. And then we inherited it and there was no use for this table. But thanks God an ugly duckling challenge happened. And as you know, I participated in it and I posted a different piece of furniture, which was my original plan. But at the same time, I decided to start working with this table. I just couldn't finish it in time. So there we go, my ugly duckling number 2. This table is over 100 years old and the most of antique furniture usually covered with shellac. And one of the best way to remove the shellac, besides scraping it, is use denatured alcohol, or in my case, it's a methyl hydrate. To prevent the methyl hydrate from evaporating too quickly, I used some shop towels and I poured methyl hydrate over them. And it did work perfectly. I didn't have to wait for long. I let it sit for about 2 or 3 minutes, and then all I had to do is just to wipe off the shellac. I love this trick, it works awesome, it's so satisfying, and most of all, it's fast. But there's always but. There were 2 spots, I think they were old burn marks, and shellac was more stubborn in those spots, but I could remove it easily with my scraper. And no, it wasn't the but I was talking about. We'll get back to that but later. Once I was done with the top, I disassembled the whole table. And while I'm working on those old and rusty screws, hard working according to my face, I wanted to say a huge thank you to all of you guys for your support, for your subscriptions, for thumbs ups. And if you're new here, welcome to my channel. By the way, my name is Alona and I live in Alberta, Canada. And I was just curious, whoever's watching me right now, where are you from, guys? It would be awesome if you'd write a few words about yourself in the comments. Once I removed the first screws out of this little skirt, the whole thing started falling apart. There was no glue left whatsoever in between those boards. I guess after all those 100 or even more years, that glue just dried out. And those legs, what I love most about this table. I mean, not the whole leg, but the bottom part. It's so neat, isn't it? And there was only one screw holding it, so it was an easy part. And here's the but I was talking about. Those carved legs. There's always a lot of finish in those grooves and it's always pain in the butt to try to get it out of there. I wish I had one of those fancy sunblasters, but I didn't. I was planning on doing the same trick with methyl hydrate, but first I decided to try scraping and the finish came off pretty easily from those bigger parts of the legs. And then I tried methyl hydrate. And trust me, I used a lot of methyl hydrate. And it seemed like whoever did this table, they never sanded the legs. They just made them using a turning lathe and then they sealed them with tons of shellac. For this piece, they obviously used shellac with a toner in there and that toner penetrated into the legs pretty good. And I'm talking about the areas where I was able to remove that shellac. But in those carved sections, there was no luck at all. On top of methyl hydrate, I decided to use my chemical stripper and it kind of worked, but still I had a lot of old finish on. And the same thing was with this skirt. And I know a professional restorator would disassemble the whole thing and work with every part separately and then reassemble, but that person never showed up for this restoration. So I did what I felt was right. Unlike the top, the sides of the skirt were glued together pretty good. And you know what? To work with this skirt was way easier than to work with the legs. With the stripper, the old finish came off pretty good. Once I was all done with stripping, I moved on to sanding. First, I sanded the top boards with 120 grit sandpaper. When I started working on this piece, I knew that someone had attempted to do some repairs on the top. On one of the boards, there was a pretty good layer of an old wood filler. It's all dried out, and the reason why they put a lot of wood filler in there because there was a large dent at the edge. Once the boards were sanded, I started gluing them together. And as you can see, there's two holes in this board. I tried first to use dowels. I pre-drilled the holes on one side and then I used those fancy caps I ordered on internet. They meant to transfer the center of my hole to the other board. And it worked well until I started drilling the holes in the other board and I screwed up. That's why I decided that it's better if I just glue those pieces together without any dowels. I didn't glue them all at once, I glued two boards at the time, and once those both sides of the table dried, I glued them together. Next morning, I came back to my tabletop and my boards were glued together perfectly and they were nice and smooth on this side. But on the front side, on the actual front side, there were still gaps. I had to fill them up with something and I didn't want to use a wood filler. For cases like this, I like to use an epoxy glue and mix it with some sawdust. It creates a perfect wood filler, it's strong and it's stainable. And there's that big dent I was talking about where the wood filler was. I taped the edge of the table and I filled it up with the same epoxy. And I left it to harden for about 2 hours. While my epoxy was hardening, I started sanding the legs. I sanded as much as it was possible with my orbital sander and 120 grit sandpaper. And then there was a lot of hand sanding, but my camera didn't capture it because my battery died. Once the epoxy hardened, I sanded the top again with 120. And I really loved how it was turning out. I love the color of the wood, I love this English oak wood grain, and I really wanted to keep it that way, on the lighter side. I was thinking about doing something like a tan wash or whitewash, but again, it was so hard because of the legs. I sanded them again with 180, partially with my orbital sander and partially by hand. But again, those grooves, in some of them, there was still some shellac left. There was an area on the top with some scratches, so I used my iron and a damp cloth to try to raise the wood grain in those scratches. While the top was drying after steaming, I sanded the bottom part of the table. And as you can see, there are grooves on the sides of the bottom part, and the same grooves are on the sides of the tabletop. And I didn't really care about those grooves, about cleaning those grooves, sanding them, because I had something in mind for them. I sanded the top with 180 grit sandpaper, and I was able to get rid of most of the scratches. And as more I was sanding, more I liked the color of this wood. And you know me, I don't give up easily. But with those legs, I was kind of desperate. There was an option to paint them, but for me it wasn't an option. So I decided to try to soak them in the methyl hydrate. And it did work, but just a little bit. There was still some shellac in those deep grooves, and the problem wasn't even the shellac. The problem was the toner that penetrated deep into the wood fibers. So at the end, I had no other choices but stain them into darker color. I picked water-based wood stain in the color American Walnut, and I can tell you right now that I was so happy with this color. It's just gorgeous. It looks so great on this oak. I love it. And maybe it's hard to see the color on the legs, but look at the bottom part. And there goes the top. Did I mention that I love this color? That it's gorgeous? And honestly, I totally forgot about this skirt. There was a little chip on one side. I squeezed some wood glue in there, clamped it, and let it dry for about 1 hour. Once my glue dried, I hand sanded it with 120 grit sandpaper. And I also hand sanded all sides of the skirt as much as I was able. I wasn't worried about the grooves in this case because I stripped them pretty good, there was no finish left. And you know what goes after 120 grit sandpaper, right? Of course, it's 180. I decided to use my orbital sander as much as it was possible, and of course a lot of hand sanding again. But that's okay, this table deserves it. And after sanding, I stained the skirt as well. And sorry, but I have to say that again, I'm obsessed with this color. And finally, those legs. I love them too, but they're not solid brass. I cleaned them with the Barkeeper Friend off camera, and if you remember, the theme of Ugly Duckling challenge was to make it shine, so this is my shiny part, even if it's not for the challenge. My stain was completely dry and I was ready to seal the piece. For the top coat, I'm using Rubio Monocoat. I've been using Rubio Monocoat a lot lately, and I love it. It is one of my favorite top coats so far. It's pretty expensive. I paid about $90 for this little jar, but the coverage is pretty awesome, so it worth the money. There's two parts, an oil itself and an accelerator. The oil can be used by itself, but it takes a long time for it to cure, about 2 weeks. With an accelerator, the curing time is about 5 to 7 days, but furniture can be lightly used next day after applying Rubio. I mix together 3 parts of oil and 1 part of the accelerator, and I like to apply Rubio with my credit card, with an old credit card. It works for me, but it could be applied with a non-abrasive pad like white or gray one. And oh my god, that wood was thirsty, like big time. I have applied Rubio to 9 drawers of humongous dressers, and I've never used that much of oil. It was just soaking it in, so I think that I might have to apply a second coat next day. I tried to apply Rubio with white pad to the legs, but it was so inconvenient, so I just used my hands. And I was absolutely sure that I was done with the top coat, but then I was like, wait, you forgot something. Yes, I forgot about the skirt again. And finally, next day, I was ready to put the table together. And remember, I told you that I had an idea about those grooves? I decided to highlight it with the gold wax. But it's hard to see because I set up the camera a bit low. While wax was drying, I started assembling the table. I had all details numbered, so it wasn't complicated at all. First, I put those holding boards back in places. Then I added the legs, and I don't know if you ever noticed that, but I forgot something. The only part I didn't number the corners of this bottom part. So I spent about 20 minutes to figure that out, and I finally got him in place, and then I realized that I forgot the skirt. The skirt was supposed to go first. So instead of disassembling the whole thing again, I decided to unscrew those folding boards and take them off with the legs and the bottom part without disassembling. I attached the skirt and then I put the whole thing together again. And we're done here. Well, almost done. The final touch to add gold wax to the groove on the tabletop. And you know, I was looking at this table and I thought like, yeah, this skirt needs to be highlighted as well. So I highlighted it with the golden wax, but I did it off camera. And now we're done. Let me remind you how this table looked before. And here's how it looks now. And I love it so much. You know, Jeff said he's not attached to this table emotionally and we can list it, but I'm not too sure if I want to. It doesn't really match the interior design I'm planning for our house, but I don't know, I have to find a way to keep it. As usual, let me know what you think. Thank you so much for watching and see you next video.